You know, something that we could talk about that would be super quick is the Relief Society activity program that we've had the last year.
They did a recent podcast on one of the channels about some of the interest groups, stake interest groups. And I was going to talk to you about that at some point. I thought it was a pretty interesting idea,
You
especially
know
for
what?
the metropolitan area.
We could probably do both. I mean, they might be similar enough.
All right. If that's something that you think will
Are
keep
you
you,
recording right now?
yeah.
Okay, so I'll just
Sure.
for it. So a little over a year ago, we had a sister get called into the presidency and she took on responsibility for Relief Society activities. And she did something that I have never experienced in my 44 years in Relief Society. And that is that she tried to do an activity every week. Every week. And of course, it didn't happen every week, but it was probably on average 4 a month, except for maybe in December. Where she did like 3. In my opinion, there shouldn't be anything in December. December's crazy. But um, but anyway, that was her program. And because I don't have small children, I don't work, it just seemed like it was something I could do to try to go to every activity that I could go to. So I started going to these activities, and each month the constant was the recipe club, where it was like this tiny little potluck and there would be a theme. Like, for example, for March, you were supposed to bring something green, like edible, but green. And then she would do like family history, where you would bring a recipe that was a tradition in your family. Um, or I don't know, she just had these great theme ideas. And usually it was like 6 to 10 women. And we would use one of the bigger classrooms. She would put up a long table, throw down a plastic table covering, have plates and forks, and everybody would just put their thing on the table. We would sit around another long table and all share what we brought, discuss what we brought, and then we would go make a plate and eat. And
That was pretty cool.
and and sometimes the food was amazing, and sometimes it wouldn't be that great. There would be like maybe 1 or 2 things that were like attractive, and everything else was like, okay, whatever. But it didn't matter. It was perfection. And I think the only way she got away with doing something every week is that everything she did was low maintenance like this. Like, she would show up 5 minutes before it started.
Yeah.
Sometimes there would be other women already there. And she gets there, throws down the plastic tablecloth. Um, and since I was called to Relief Society president like 6 weeks ago, I've been following some Facebook groups that are devoted to Relief Society presidencies. And so I hear all these discussions, and one of them is, well, our bishop wants every Relief Society activity to be focused on the Savior. And so I'm thinking back to some of them were like, she had this book club thing going, and we would read little church books. But on these recipe clubs, I'm pretty sure the Savior was never mentioned,
Well,
or anything spiritual was mentioned.
I wonder how many people went because of that.
That could be. That could be. And it was always a pretty good mix. There were maybe 3 or 4 people that were regulars, and then the rest would just be whoever could come that night, whoever was inspired by the theme. And I mean, there was always a prayer. Maybe we had closing prayers, I can't remember. And it was just a bunch of chit chat around food, food is so easy.
Yeah.
When you keep it simple, food is easy.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so she would always have recipe clubs. Sometimes she would do a book club. Sometimes it was a physical activity like pickleball or yoga. Um, what else did she do? Oh,
Okay.
and then sometimes she would do like a Saturday thing, like a watercolor, something that took a little more time. And so I just fell in love with her model. It was always small group, very low maintenance activities. And then they called me to be Relief Society president. I didn't keep her as a counselor, but I brought in as a counselor one of the sisters that was on her committee. And I told this sister, I said, I love this program, but it's a lot and you don't have to keep it up. If you want to just do one activity a month or one every 2 months or 3 months, you don't have to keep it up. And then this week, this counselor called me up and she said, they want to keep doing weekly activities. And
They as
so,
in the committee.
yeah, the committee. And so they lined all this out. Okay, listen to September and you'll understand how low maintenance. One of them is to do a morning walk around the track at the nearby housing development. Another one is just meeting at the park on one morning.
Wait,
Rest club.
this is one. So the going around the track, that's just one morning in the month. Like you just did it
Yeah,
once. Okay.
there's no attempt to make it a regular exercise routine. They're just doing it one morning.
Okay.
And then one morning at the park. And then recipe club, of course, it's a favorite. And then a temple session, a morning temple session. So all, again, very low maintenance. So they're going to keep up her program. And I love it. I love it.
All right.
And
Well, the thing that I really need to say, or something we will see tonight, is that what you're describing is my idea. I thought of this. I thought of this like probably 4 years ago. And I've been trying to make it happen, and we're getting closer. We're getting closer to making it happen in our ward. But I had this realization a while back that we have these big parties, and then when COVID hit, the big party turned into the only thing that ever happened, right? For that whole year, it was like the big party, and so then the next big party came around for COVID, like 2020, and when it got canceled, people were like, "We're not going to have a big party for 2 years." And so when the next big party came around, I think it was the Christmas one, people were like, "We got to go all out. Like we got to get 10 Santa Clauses to show up, and they got to all have sleighs." And it was insane. And that's when I kind of realized, like, wait a second, like we could systematically organize a bunch of miniature parties that would be, so you take the effort of the big party that's once a year and you break it up 50 times and you take 1/5 of that energy and do something every week, and you'd have basically the same effect with a bigger distribution for people to participate. So instead of going to the big party and having this like wow experience, you could have like maybe 10 little wows and 10 little okays and 10 little yeah I'd rather nots throughout the year, but at least you're doing something. So I kicked that around for a while. And I so let me go back to my questions that I had for you. So how did you guys announce it?
well, Relief Society does this monthly newsletter. So it's on the monthly newsletter, right? And then they post it to Facebook like crazy. And this counselor would send out a mass email to Relief Society sisters like, hey, remember, we're doing book club. This is our book.
Okay. So
So they were
you
using
really
that
are
Relief. They were using at least 3 communication outlets.
So you're nailing the communication part of it. You're knocking that out of the park. That's gotta help a ton. When you said there's only a few people attending, what's the attendance on average? 5?
Recipe Club, I would say 6 to 10.
Oh, that's pretty good.
And I gave a presentation in a little Saturday thing that they did, that there were probably 5 women there. And only 2 of them didn't have to be there.
So it would be pretty rare to get 2. Like there's usually more than 2 or 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There's usually, I would say average is like 8 to 10.
Wow, that's pretty good. And how big is your Sunday or sacrament attendance? It's like 150 or 200?
I don't know that. I know that we have about 60 active sisters.
Okay. Okay. 60 participating sisters. We had the communications guy visit our ward today, so he was informing us on some of the changes in lingo that they're trying to.
Oh, wait, what's the word?
Participating.
Okay, that's a good word.
Correct.
When I was on my mission, we would knock doors and the Catholics would say, I'm Catholic, but não pratico. I don't practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Are you That's what they always say, right? Are you practicing or non-practicing?
yeah. So I think there are better words than active or less active or non-active. Yeah.
Yeah. I like participating and attending. But
Yeah.
but yeah, he filled us in on a couple other ones. Like the one I didn't expect was convert. He's like, yeah, instead of convert, we say new member. And I've always, and it made me think of like in the past, I've always like wondered about the word convert because it like kind of reminds me of like convent, or you're converting from something to something else. And it's like, well, what if people aren't really converting? Like, what if they don't feel like they're converting to anything? What if they feel like they're adding or transitioning or peeling off? Like it's just kind of a weird word to use.
Or joining or gathering.
Yeah, it means something specific. The word convert has grown to mean something specific in our culture, but new members hear that, and I don't know if they're like, "Oh, that makes total sense," or if they're like, "Why do you guys use that word?"
I like new member. That's good.
All right, so the lady that was in charge,
Wait. The one I am trying to get used to is friend. Missionaries don't use the word
yeah,
investigators. And it's been friend for a long time, but I only really caught on about 5 months ago. And I'm still trying to absorb that into my vocabulary.
yeah, it's friend, and then there was another word that they used, a new friend, a new investigator, a new, man, I can't remember what it was, participant or something. But yeah, he listed off a few of them. There's converts, inactive, what was it? Investigator. And he said we don't use investigator anymore because it sounds like you're a detective and nobody's investigating any crimes. It's like, yeah, okay, it's good. But yeah, he didn't say anything about the word Mormon. That surprised me. But yeah, the one that kills me is there's a few people that are still diehard using the word Mormon, like they're just obviously not going to give it up, which makes I feel sad about it because after thinking about it, there are better words than the word Mormon. Like I've noticed that if I tell people the Mormon church, then there's like a whole bunch of stuff that comes with that word. And if I say the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they kind of get a little bit better. But if I say something like, oh, I belong to the Restored Church, that kind of brings more curiosity and accuracy rather than
Oh,
any of the other options. And if I say
yeah,
like,
I
yeah,
like that.
it's like it's just a part of being a part of the restored gospel, and that kind of like continues to be like, wait, restored gospel, what's so there's a bunch of stuff like that that I've been experimenting with.
That's cool. That's cool.
Um, okay, back on topic. So the lady that was in charge, did she have any kids?
She had a senior. So
So she's got some bandwidth to do this. I'm just wondering how
yeah,
important
yeah.
that
I
played
mean,
into it.
she works she's a very busy person. Her youngest was a senior in high school. But she's high energy.
Well, busy people get stuff done.
Yeah, high energy, and she was just determined to make this happen. And
Is that
I should talk to her and ask her, where it came from. I don't know if she thought we needed it because of COVID or if she would have done it regardless of COVID.
Yeah, we should bring her on.
I'll have to pick her brain about it.
Do a follow-up. Was it the same people showing up, or would it be a pretty good mix?
Well, the presidency would show up when they could, right? And then from there it was a mix. Outside of the presidency, I was probably the most regular.
Okay, so there's a pretty good.
So it was a pretty good mix.
That's
Like
cool.
out of the blue, you would see somebody you hadn't seen ever at any activity. You
Yeah,
go,
that's what I imagine, especially if your communication's good. Like my fear would be to be the same four people showing up and never anybody knew. But it just seems like if your communication's good, that would be really, really hard because people are going to be curious. They're going to be available. They're going to be like, oh, next week, next week, next week, and eventually go.
okay, can I say something? When you plan a big activity and you put all that work in and you don't get a lot of turnout, that is demoralizing. That is really hard. And I've seen that happen where there's so much effort into like a big word activity and you hardly get anybody.
That,
Now, if you plan a walk at the track at the neighborhood housing development and you only get 2 people, it's like great. There's 2 of you and you have a great conversation and it's no big.
that's why I also put very little effort into the big parties that we have. They're still big, and there's like food and everything, but like people will be like, "Oh, there's got to be more decorations," and I'll be like, "I'll do some, but if I spend a lot of time doing decorations, then I put myself at that risk, right? Of feeling resentful if people don't show up the way I wanted them to or whatever. It is hard. So did your guys's big parties, taper off isn't the right word, but are you doing fewer big parties now that you're doing more smaller parties? And I say party, I mean activities.
We never did a lot of ward parties. I would say, are we 3 or 4 a
Let me
year? Of
let
course,
me let me put it this way. I'm guessing beforehand you did monthly activities.
something. Well, I couldn't even tell you beforehand. I have never seen it be more than one a month, and even that was rare. I
But
mean,
those
I have been in Relief Society during times when you would go a whole year and you might have a Christmas activity and that was it.
okay.
So what she was doing, weekly activities or near weekly, I'd never seen it before. And I told myself, I'll never see this again. When she gets released, it'll be over. But then I get called as president. My counselor wants to keep it up. Who
So
knew?
so I was assuming that if you went from monthly activities to weekly activities, that there would be a little bit less effort and planning put into the monthlies because you're doing the weeklies. You know what I mean? Because in my ward, they do monthlies. And there is a little bit of effort that's put into them. Like they got to organize some little craft participation or like a speaker or food, whatever. And so they put some effort into it. But I'm guessing that if they went to weeklies, that they would put a quarter of the energy into the weeklies that they're putting into the monthlies.
I the previous Relief Society president was in for a year and then she moved out of the ward. And I don't remember any big Relief Society activity. I don't remember anything big.
And that
We
and
have
that
ward parties. We have maybe 3 ward parties a year that are big-ish,
but it would make
but
sense
not
that you
Relief
wouldn't
Society.
it would make sense that you wouldn't have any big Relief Society activities if you're doing the weeklies, right? Because it would be hard to be like, okay, we're gonna do one small activity a week, and then every 6 months a big Relief Society activity. It's like, okay, now we're trying to do both, and it's gonna, for that period of time, it's gonna be overwhelming. Or maybe that month you're gonna do a big one, maybe that month you don't do any small ones or whatever. Anyway, I was just curious if you had any sense of that. What was the size of the committee that you're referring to?
Well, about 5 women.
And these 5 women would be brainstorming ideas for the weeklies. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and we try to get a good mix in the committee, like older, younger, working, non-working. Yeah. So about 5 women. And I'll tell you, I mean, I knew who the women were that were on the committee. I just sort of became aware of it as I was attending. And they were not regulars. They would come, but I was the regular. I was the non-presidency regular.
Huh. All right. You ready for my experience? Okay, so I had this idea years ago, and there was a really good friend of mine in the ward, one of my best friends, kind of introduced the idea to me, and I basically said, yeah, you should do it, but I think he's probably more of one of the guys that needs somebody to do it for him so that he can participate in it, because he wants to participate in that kind of thing, but he doesn't quite have the, to put it together, to get organized about it, or whatever, whether it's courage or skill set or whatever, I don't know. And I am one of those guys that doesn't have the time. Kids and work and stuff, and having something like that, I was like, man, if I do that, I'll do it a few times and then it'll peter out. It's not gonna work. And I even mentioned it to an elders quorum president in another ward, and he basically said, yeah, that's exactly what we need. And I've had guys say things like that they need something like that, like more of just hangout time. And it can't be something that's a big commitment like that. This is his opinion, and that's fine. Is that if it's once a month, then it creates kind of a stressful dynamic on relationships, marital relationships. And it's not hard for the women to get away once a month, because the man feels obligated to watch the kids, and the women feels entitled to a break, and all of that has a lot of truth to it. No judgment there. And so they're going to get out for the Relief Society activity. But when it comes time for a monthly elders quorum activity, the guy comes home from work and he's like, hey, I'm going to go to an elders quorum activity. And in a relationship that's not quite set up to deal with that, you have a wife that's like, I've been home with the kids all day. It's your turn to take the kids. You are not leaving to go hang out with your boys again. You've been with your boys all day. This is not happening. So I know it's kind of a cynical view, not necessarily mine, just saying it's out there. And
Oh,
so,
I can see that dynamic totally. Yeah, with
yeah,
young families, totally.
well, I know it exists. Um, but yeah, I have my doubts as to exactly how prevalent it is. But anyway, that makes that a little bit more tricky in some people's mind to set up a monthly elders quorum activity. And then you take that to weekly, and it's like, oh, okay, is this how?
That's a good point. Like if dad was taken off once a week
But
to
here's,
go hang out. Oh, here's the other thing. On these activities that this counselor was doing, they were never longer than an hour.
yes,
They were like
yes.
boom, boom, gone.
So it's important that it's short, at least in my, I've never done it, but in the way I've thought about it in my head, it's important that they're short, and it's important that they're consistent. So what we're trying to do twice a month. We're trying to do every Thursday after the Elders Quorum Sunday. We come back Thursday at 6, and you can plan to be there for an hour. And we don't have the plan necessarily. Like next week you can expect this, the week after you can expect this, the week after you can expect this. Ours is, you can expect us to be there. You can't expect there to be food. You can't expect there to be good conversation. You can't expect your buddies to be there if you're not asking them to come or whatever. But you can expect someone to be there. And the demographic that we're aiming at is definitely not, I'll speak for myself. The demographic that I'm aiming at when I'm thinking about this is not the dads of little kids. It's not that like stressful dynamic marriage that we were just describing. It's that we got a lot of guys in our ward that are widowers and stuff, and that are just kind of lonely. Like they don't really have a lot going on. We've got probably 8 guys that would fall into that demographic, and all of them would make a concerted effort to be there every week. And they definitely wouldn't all make it every week, but there'd probably be like 4 of them that would make it every week, and they'd kind of come in combinations. And they would just sit around and shoot the bull, and they'd have a deck of face cards, and maybe somebody brings cookies every week or whatever. And I think that's all it would take for it to be consistent, even to the point of not needing a leader, not needing an organizer. Like if it's consistent enough and people know that they can just show up, the same group of guys that don't have anything to do Thursday nights are going to be like, oh, might as well go. And they're just going to go. And then every once in a while, you'll get the dad who got brave enough to stand up to his wife and leave the kids at home. He might show up, or, people that are home for the holidays or whatever will show up. But that's
can I just say that as you talk, what it's making me think of are the men's ministry groups in other churches.
yeah, I could go on a long time about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've done interfaith work through state communication, and most of the churches have a weekly men's ministry meeting.
Yeah.
Ministry group.
Yeah, and even if they don't have a weekly men's meeting, the men are meeting each other, at least in this community church that I've been involved in. They meet up with each other throughout the week regularly, right? Because they're basically dependent on each other through work and through different things, family, babysitting, whatever. Like they're constantly running into each other or making excuses to run into each other, which is kind of the opposite of what the culture suggests that we've been in. Like ours is very like independent and entrepreneur and work hard, and you should be able to do it on your own. And so you don't have guys that are calling up and being like, I don't understand the verses we're reading for Come Follow Me this week. Like, can you please explain this to me? It's like, no, you're supposed to get it. So there's a bit of a cultural thing there. But yeah, I totally agree. It does remind me of some groups like
Well,
that.
I guess I've seen two things. I've seen men's Bible study groups in these Christian churches, but I've also seen like, where once a month they'll get together for a potluck or whatever. And I've even seen not wards, but there's a church in town where they have a monthly men's group, like an evening thing, and the women cook for them. Like they're in the kitchen and they cook for them. They don't participate in whatever they're going to do, but they cook for them.
I saw that last week, but the other way around. I saw a Relief Society activity where the women weren't allowed to cook, and the men showed up and cooked for them.
That's cool. I love, yeah, either way, I love it.
I do think this is important to think outside the box and help people realize that it can look a lot different than what we've historically done. But yeah,
And let me just say another thought I had is that over the years in Relief Society, it's been called so many different things. Like the first thing I remember it being called is homemaking. Then it was called enrichment. Then it was called special interest groups. And then they kind of made it all generic and said, anytime Relief Society sisters are together, it's a Relief Society meeting. There's no special name for all the different meetings. And so I think just with that, that there's a little bit of a struggle trying to figure out how to serve that need.
yeah, there was that group that was kind of an apocryphal or maybe even apostate group, but they met every week and discussed things in the church, and they called themselves the Swearing Elders. So we need to come up with some kind of a group name for ourselves that's something like that, like the Book of Mormon Mobsters or something like that. But I do think that there is a solution, and you just you got to keep playing with it until you find what works.
You know, when this sister started doing these weekly activities, I would call up my mother-in-law. She's very social. She loves gatherings. But there are a few mobility issues, you know, especially in the evening. She needs somebody walking next to her to make sure she gets into the building safely. So anyway, we would go together, and that was kind of my mission at first, right? Like, I'm going to get her there. And but then even when she wasn't interested in going or was too tired to go, then I would go. It's
I
just
think
so healthy.
I think it might be the opposite for me, where I would go for other people, but if there was 8 guys consistently showing up, I would probably go less because it is a drive and
Yeah.
I don't have a ton of time. There's other things I can do with my time. But I know that there's 8 to 12 guys in the ward that would love an opportunity to do that every so often.
You
Um,
know, I know that in the Elders Quorum organization, there is a calling for an activities coordinator, because we have one in our ward.
well, I wouldn't necessarily worry about the title of it because in my dream scenario, these guys would show up and they would start problem solving for service projects in the area that we, because there's always like half a dozen service projects going on in the ward at any given time, but people just don't know about them, and so they don't make time to help out. So these guys would come together once a week, twice a month or whatever, and they would have a unwritten agenda of basically like what's going on in the ward lately, because somebody's moving and somebody's grass needs cut and then their roof is leaking, and like there's always a few things like that going on, and there's people who are interested in helping or even have, they have the time to help and they're interested. They just don't know about it, and it's hard to be able to get those people in the right place to hear what's going on. So that was kind of the idea. And then again, if we could get the communication dialed in, I would like to move it around because our ward is spread out, right? It's like an hour by 2 hours, hour wide by 2 hours long. And so we could easily move it and do like maybe different little fast food joints or different houses or different parks or wherever we want to move it to. But I think for us, the communication piece is going to be hard because um, there's
Guys are not on Facebook.
they're not on Facebook. They're not good with email. They do fairly good with their phones. And even if
You're
we,
almost going to have to set up a text group,
yeah, I
and
thought about that, but like,
that's cumbersome.
our guys aren't good with text groups either, because there is a little bit of, oh, what's the word? There's a little bit of know-how to do text groups so you're not blowing up people's phones in the middle of the night. What's the word for that? It's not ethics. Um, Decorum. No, what's the word?
Etiquette.
Etiquette. Thank you. There's a little bit of etiquette to know so you're not being really disruptive. And so that's why we're doing it the Thursday after Elders Quorum, is to say like, hey, see you guys on Thursday. You're all here. Announcement. We'll see you Thursday. Which also isn't perfect because I know there's probably 4 to 6 guys that aren't there in Elders Quorum that would like to know about it too. So you got to get a few texts out there like that. But yeah, the communication part is the hardest part, is going to be the hardest part for us for sure.
Oh, and you guys do a printed program, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you could
Yes.
throw it in there.
Again, assuming people read the program, that
Yeah.
would be good. So
You
my
know,
my,
I
my thought
I
is that
learned early. Go ahead.
if we could consistently do it on the same Thursdays
Yeah.
for like 6 months, then that would solve the communication problem.
Yeah. One thing I learned when I first got into communication, state communication, is that you don't look for what's the best communication outlet. You just use a shotgun approach. You use everything.
Yeah. Yeah, use as much as possible.